I never thought I'd find myself back under my parents' roof again, but after a bitter breakup, I had no choice. I left behind my city apartment in New York and returned to the quiet suburban home I once called my sanctuary. The adjustment was rough, old routines clashed with new disappointments, but I hoped that time would ease the sting of heartache. I picked up a temporary night job at a local 24-hour pharmacy, a position that promised to help me rebuild, even if it meant sacrificing sleep and social life. One chilly autumn night, after a grueling overnight shift, I set out to grab a late dinner before heading home. The roads were empty, lit only by scattered streetlights and the faint glow of distant buildings. I decided to stop at my favorite 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town, a place where the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon always managed to lift my spirits, even if only for a moment. After ordering a turkey club sandwich and a hot cup of coffee, I paid cash and left the diner, my mind already drifting toward the comfort of home. My parents' house was nestled in a quiet cul-de-sac, far from the chaos of city life. The drive felt strangely serene as I merged onto a narrow, dimly lit road lined with towering, bare trees and whispering winds that seemed to carry secrets of the night. As I neared my destination, I noticed a peculiar blue sedan following me at a steady pace. At first, I assumed it was merely another late-night driver, but something about its persistence unsettled me. I increased my speed slightly, hoping the car would fall back into the stream of traffic, yet it mirrored every move I made. My heart began to race as I wondered if I was being tailed. Eventually, I turned onto the familiar street leading to my childhood home. The sedan's headlights vanished momentarily as I pulled into the driveway, only to reappear in my rearview mirror before fading away into the darkness. Shaking off the unease, I parked and grabbed the spare key my parents had hidden beneath a flower pot. I always valued the security of that well-practiced routine, quietly slipping in through the back door when I knew they were fast asleep. Inside, the house was silent except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the hallway clock. I prepared to settle in, anticipating the solace of a warm meal and a quiet evening. But as I set my sandwich on the kitchen table, a subtle sound disrupted the stillness, a faint, rhythmic tapping at the front door. My pulse quickened. I paused mid-bite, straining to catch the sound above my own rapid breathing. I crept to the window in the foyer and peered out. There was no one visible in the dim light, only the long shadows cast by the tall oak trees lining the street. The tapping persisted, a deliberate, measured noise, as if someone was testing the lock. I hesitated, then decided to call my parents from the other room, hoping one of them might be awake. But there was no answer, and the familiar comfort of home suddenly felt threatening. Trying to remain rational, I told myself it must be a loose shutter or a stray branch brushing against the door. I returned to the table, trying to continue my meal. Just as I reached for my coffee, the front door creaked open slowly. I froze, my eyes locked on the dark outline that had slipped into the foyer. The figure was tall and gaunt, wearing a hooded jacket that swallowed his face in shadow. My mind raced with thoughts of intrusion and the possibility that my earlier tailing encounter was connected. Before I could react, the figure moved silently down the hallway. I backed away slowly, heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. Desperation took hold. I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911, whispering a frantic description of the intruder and my location. The operator's calm voice was a lifeline, promising that help was on the way, even as every minute felt like an eternity. In a surge of adrenaline, I crept toward the staircase, intent on finding a safe place where I could hide or better observe the intruder's movements. I ducked into a small guest room and bolted the door behind me, my ears straining for any further sounds. The house was plunged into a heavy silence, punctuated only by my own shallow breaths and the distant murmur of approaching sirens. Minutes later, the sound of flashing lights and muffled voices drifted through the windows. The police had arrived. I cautiously peered out from behind a curtain, watching as officers combed the exterior of the house, flashlights cutting through the darkness. They searched every doorway and window, yet the intruder was nowhere to be seen. It was as if he had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the lingering dread of his presence. After a brief investigation, the officers reassured me that the area was secure, though they could find no evidence of forced entry or any trace of the mysterious visitor. My mind buzzed with questions. Who was he? Had he been waiting for me all along? And what did his calculated, eerie movements mean? In the days that followed, the incident continued to haunt me. I installed additional locks on every door and window and even requested the police to patrol the neighborhood during the late night hours. I found myself glancing nervously at every shadow, every unexpected sound, my sleep plagued by vivid nightmares of that hooded figure. Even as life slowly returned to a semblance of normality, a part of me remained on high alert. I share this story not to incite fear, but to remind you that even in the place you call home, you may never truly be safe from the unexpected. Sometimes, the past collides with the present in ways that leave a lasting mark on your soul. And though I've taken every precaution since that terrifying night, the memory of those silent footsteps and the chilling echo of that hooded intruder still lingers, an ever-present reminder that our sense of security can be shattered in an instant. I never imagined that a simple road trip could spiral into a nightmare, but one early morning changed everything. After a painful breakup, I decided to leave the city behind and visit an old friend in a small town down south. I left my cramped New York apartment at around 2 a.m., determined to beat the rush and avoid the endless gridlock. The roads were empty, the only sounds were the hum of my car and the whisper of the wind against the asphalt. I felt a mixture of relief and melancholy as I drove, my mind replaying memories of better days, even as the loneliness of my recent loss weighed heavily on me. My route took me through vast stretches of darkness, lit only by sporadic streetlights and the occasional neon sign from a roadside diner. I stopped briefly at a 24-hour coffee shop for a much-needed cup of joe and a moment to collect my thoughts. The warm interior and friendly chatter provided a stark contrast to the silent highways outside, but my mind was still restless. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that the night held secrets waiting to be uncovered. After refueling both my car and my spirit, I continued along the highway. The journey was smooth until I noticed a dark sedan mirroring my movements in the rearview mirror. At first, I assumed it was just another late-night traveler, but as the minutes passed, the car remained uncomfortably close, its headlights fixed on me like unblinking eyes. I tried to speed up, but the sedan kept pace, its presence growing more unnerving by the moment. With a growing sense of paranoia, I took the next exit, a less traveled route that wound through rural backroads. The isolation of the countryside, with its bare trees and wide-open fields under a star-studded sky, offered little comfort. I pressed my foot a little harder on the accelerator, desperate to lose the persistent follower. After several tense miles, the sedan finally disappeared from view, leaving me shaking and questioning what I had just experienced. As I neared my destination, I pulled off the highway at a small rest area with a flickering neon sign advertising a local diner. Hungry and exhausted, I parked my car and headed inside, hoping for a hot meal and a moment to catch my breath. The diner was nearly empty, its only occupants a tired waitress behind the counter and a few solitary figures at scattered tables. I ordered a hearty breakfast sandwich and sat at a corner booth, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. While waiting for my order, I couldn't help but notice a man in a worn leather jacket sitting alone at the counter. His eyes were dark and unexpressive, and he occasionally glanced toward the entrance as if expecting someone, or something, to appear. I dismissed it as nothing more than a passing oddity, but a sense of foreboding still lingered in the air. After finishing my meal, I decided it was time to get back on the road. I returned to my car and started my journey again, feeling slightly more alert after the brief respite at the diner. My route now took me along a desolate stretch of highway bordered by dense woods. The tranquility of the night was suddenly shattered by the sound of a car approaching from behind. I glanced in my mirror and was startled to see not the familiar sedan from earlier, but a blue pickup truck with its engine roaring and headlights blazing. The truck drew alongside me, and a man in the driver's seat waved frantically as if trying to communicate something urgent. Curiosity and caution warred within me. I slowed down, allowing the pickup to pull ahead. But then, as I neared a sparsely lit gas station, the truck followed and parked at the opposite end of the lot. I decided to fill up my tank and take a moment to regroup. The gas station was eerily quiet. The only light came from a few sputtering fluorescent bulbs and the steady beam of my headlights. I completed my fuel stop and noticed that the truck was still there, parked under the dim glow of a single lamp. Before I could even process what was happening, I heard a knock at my car window. I slowly rolled down the glass to find the same man from the truck standing there. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his cap, but his eyes held a strange intensity. In a low, urgent voice, he explained that his vehicle had broken down and he needed help jump-starting his truck. He claimed that he had jumper cables in his trunk and pleaded for assistance. Against my better judgment, I agreed, thinking that perhaps this was just another stranded traveler in need. I parked my car next to his truck and, after a brief exchange of words, connected the jumper cables. For a few tense minutes, we waited silently. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Then, unexpectedly, the sound of engines revving filled the air. 2 pickup trucks screeched into the lot from opposite directions, surrounding us. My heart pounded in my chest as the man's friendly expression contorted into something sinister. Before I could react, I disconnected the cables, locked my car, and ran toward the dark woods bordering the lot. I sprinted through the undergrowth, branches clawing at my skin as I desperately tried to put distance between myself and the gas station. I heard shouts and the thumping of heavy footsteps behind me, voices speaking in a language I couldn't fully understand, full of anger and threat. Panic drove me forward until the sounds finally began to fade, replaced by the distant wail of a car alarm. When I dared to look back, I saw that the trucks had vanished, leaving only an unsettling silence in their wake. Eventually, I made my way back to my car. As I reached the parking lot, I discovered a horrifying sight. My rear window was shattered, and nearly everything I had in the back seat was missing: my bags, my clothes, even the little keepsakes that reminded me of home. My hands trembled as I dialed 911, recounting every detail of the surreal and terrifying encounter. The police arrived shortly after, combing through the area and collecting any available evidence, but the vehicles and the men had vanished without a trace. In the aftermath of that night, I was left with more questions than answers. The unsettling feeling of being watched and followed continued to haunt me on every lonely stretch of road. Every time I drive through the dark, I can't help but glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those men's eyes gleaming in the darkness. I've since tightened every security measure and become ever more vigilant, yet the memory of that night, of that eerie encounter at the gas station, remains an indelible scar on my soul. I share this story not to spread fear, but to serve as a reminder that sometimes, the most mundane journeys can take a dark turn when you least expect it. Life can change in an instant, and the shadows that follow you on the road may hold secrets far more dangerous than you could ever imagine. Every mile I drive now is a constant reminder to be cautious, to trust my instincts, and to never take the safety of the open road for granted. I never imagined that a routine cross-country drive could spiral into an encounter straight out of a nightmare. It was one of those long, endless journeys, driving at night with nothing but the hum of the engine and the occasional flicker of streetlights to keep me company. I had set out early, determined to beat the usual traffic and the chaos of the city, and for a few blissful hours, the road was mine alone. The solitude of the highway had always been a comfort to me, a place to escape and think. But on this particular night, as I navigated through winding rural roads, an unsettling feeling began to creep in. After several hours on the road, hunger got the better of me. I pulled off at a small rest area marked by a faded neon sign. The lot was nearly deserted, with only a few cars scattered under a sparse glow from a couple of broken streetlights. I parked my car, grabbed my backpack, and headed towards the modest restroom building. The cool night air did little to ease my growing apprehension as I stepped inside the facility. The restroom was dimly lit, its fluorescent lights flickering sporadically. I chose an isolated stall and locked the door behind me. Just as I was about to settle in, I heard a soft shuffle from the far corner of the room. Glancing over the top of the stall door, I saw a figure standing silently, with his back turned to me. At first, I assumed he might be washing his hands or adjusting his clothes. But his stillness and the way he avoided any movement made my skin crawl. I could feel my heart racing, every second stretching longer than the last. Unable to shake off the disquiet, I decided to flush and exit quickly. As I reached the sink, I caught a glimpse of him turning slowly. His face was partially hidden in shadow, but the emptiness in his eyes was unmistakable, a void that chilled me to the bone. I mumbled a quick apology and hurried out of the restroom, my footsteps echoing loudly in the otherwise silent hall. Outside, I locked my car and climbed back in, my mind reeling from the encounter. Determined to leave the eerie rest area behind, I restarted my journey. I merged onto a long stretch of highway, the road bathed in darkness except for the occasional beacon of a distant car. The unease lingered like a heavy fog, and I found myself glancing repeatedly at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that same figure lurking behind me. For a while, the drive was uneventful, but as I approached a bend in the road, I noticed a dark pickup truck following closely. Its headlights seemed to lock onto my car, tracking my every move. I tried to shake it off by taking an exit onto a quieter, less traveled route lined with dense trees and narrow shoulders. The change of scenery did little to alleviate my anxiety, as the pickup truck's taillights remained visible in my mirror. I pressed a little harder on the accelerator, hoping the distance would widen, but the truck maintained its relentless pursuit until it finally disappeared into the night at a curve. The brief reprieve felt like a miracle, but I couldn't shake the lingering sense of being watched. Eventually, I reached a larger rest area, a different one, with a slightly better building and a handful of parking spaces. Hoping for a normal break, I parked near the restroom and stepped inside once more. This time, the building was quieter. Almost too quiet. I hurried to a stall and locked the door, thinking that maybe I could finally relax and take care of my business. But as soon as I settled in, I heard unmistakable footsteps approaching the stall. The sound was deliberate, echoing in the confined space, and then I heard a faint, almost imperceptible whisper. My heart pounded as I tried to decipher the sound, but before I could gather my thoughts, the door handle rattled lightly, as if someone was testing if the stall was securely locked. I swallowed hard and reached for my phone, hesitating only a moment before dialing emergency services. I whispered into the phone, explaining that I was at a rest area and that someone might be trying to break in. The operator's calm voice urged me to stay inside and keep quiet until help arrived. I sat in that stall, every second stretching out as I listened to the silence that followed the initial disturbance. The handle finally stilled, and after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps receded into the distance. Mustering every ounce of courage, I slowly unlatched the door and peeked out. The corridor was empty, no sign of anyone lurking in the shadows. I decided it was safest to leave immediately, locking the stall and rushing back to my car. As I drove away from the rest area, my hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. The encounter left a mark on me, and every dark stretch of highway thereafter was filled with the echo of those footsteps and the memory of that cold, dead stare. The journey resumed, but the relief was short-lived. In the rearview mirror, I occasionally caught a fleeting glimpse of movement, a shadow or a flash of light, that made my pulse race all over again. I eventually made it to my destination, but the haunting experience stayed with me long after that night. Every time I embark on a long drive in the dark, I remain ever vigilant, my senses on high alert for any sign of something, or someone, unsettling. I share this story not to instill needless fear, but as a reminder that sometimes, even on the most ordinary roads, darkness can harbor secrets that challenge our sense of safety. It's a testament to the unpredictability of life, and a reminder to trust your instincts when they whisper of hidden dangers in the silence of the night.